in Skolton. I live here in Canmore, been here for 3 years, and we're currently working on a big renovation of the whole main floor of our house. And so we got the HEET kit because we had taken some pieces of drywall down, and we actually, as you can see, took down the whole ceiling. So I wanted to take particularly the infrared camera to be able to see gaps in insulation and any areas that we could fix while we have the opportunity here. So I'm using the infrared camera right now. You can see we've got the drywall off of this wall. And it's great because I can now use it to see any gaps of insulation. I've put in, this is new Rockwell insulation, but if you can see on the camera, there's this really dark spot here. That means there's a cold temperature, and you can see that that's like 9 degrees in there compared to that, which is coming through at like 16, 17 degrees. So a big gap, and it's amazing because all it is with the naked eye, you barely even notice, but it's just this gap in insulation that's got a little crack in there. And so if we pull this a little tighter, and also you should be wearing gloves if you do this, you can see that that crack has gone mostly away, but there's still kind of a gap down here in this little hole. And so and this is pretty common because often with insulation, it's actually mostly an installation issue where people have really crammed it in there and pushed it in tight and left gaps or compressed the insulation. So we just want to pull that back out so that the air in between can let it breathe. So then, aside from the walls, because we took off the whole drywall of our ceiling, we now had access to our headers. And so this might be uncommon if you're doing a main floor reno, but really common if you have an unfinished basement or unfinished crawl space. These are often big sources of air leakage and potential moisture getting through. And you can see here, so on the left-hand side, we've got a couple of bays that I've pulled the insulation out of already, so they're coming up as really dark. But then around this one, which is the insulation as it was installed, you can see how it's kind of cool around the outside and along the edges. And so again, that's partly just because of the way the insulation's crammed, and there's some thermal bridging in there. And so what we've done is we're pulling all of that insulation out, and if you come down to this bay over here, we're replacing it with foam insulation and then spray foaming around the outside. And so you can see how now that's a pretty continuous the same temperature. There's no cold spots except for what's in the corner there, and that's caused by a thermal bridge because there's an extra piece of 2x6 which is connecting to the outside, so it's basically like a stud. So that's what we're going for. Okay, so while we were doing this from an energy perspective, to create more of a continuous thermal break to make sure all the insulation is really top notch, we also, when we started, we found out that this is also a good health perspective. You can see in this bay these black spots in here. Those are actually, I think, mold or at least moisture damage, because when these plastic, the poly gets put up here, they're typically just kind of haphazardly stapled in. And anytime there's a crack in the poly, that's a really good spot for moisture to just flow through. I think the kind of measure is like 30 times more water can move through a pinprick in a wall than just through the wall itself. So we have all of these gaps, and even though it might be sealed because there's your ceiling here, moisture can still find its way through all the other cracks that exist. And so it goes around this poly. The batt insulation does nothing to stop water. And then it goes, and you can see it's in here too. There's more mold in here, and it condenses, that moisture condenses on this outside wall. So now not only are we able to better air seal, it also becomes, the insulation that we're using is a moisture barrier, so it doesn't allow moisture to get to this spot and create mold. We can also treat this now and make sure that mold is dead, so we're making a healthier home for ourselves too, which is pretty nice. A little unexpected benefit, but there it is. yeah, we'll get these all patched up and ready to go. Okay, so to do this, you can probably find a lot of good tutorials online. It's pretty simple. We took the approach of cutting pieces of insulation, foam insulation, and then just spray foaming around the outside. Alternatively, you could do it yourself or hire a professional to spray foam all the interior, those header spaces. But we chose to go this way because A, it's a little simpler to do ourselves, and B, we can use a product like this, which is GPS insulation, so graphite polystyrene, and it just has a lower global warming potential. So from a climate perspective, as far as foam goes, it's a little bit friendlier and still has pretty high insulation values. A product like this is also very readily available, and they've done a lot of work to bring down the global warming effects of creating this type of foam, but it's still decently higher than the GPS foam. But again, readily available. So all you're doing is just measuring your space, cut a square a little bit, like a ½ inch smaller on all sides, and then just get your can of spray foam and foam around the outside. Easy peasy.